Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
The Pirate King's Family by Straw Hatter 1. A series of one-shots following the lives of Monkey D. Luffy, Boa Hancock, and their daughter, Monkey D. Lucy. Adios.
On the night before the long-awaited wedding of Boa Hancock and Monkey D. Luffy, the palace on Amazon Lily was filled with last-minute preparations. Hancock was a flurry of nervous excitement with mirrors and candles filling her room, casting soft glows and flickering shadows that danced across her face as she tried on her veil one last time. Her heart fluttered as she continued to think about what tomorrow would hold. She would be marrying the man who had unwittingly captured her heart so completely. Meanwhile, far from the pre-wedding chaos, Luffy stood alone on a secluded balcony on the far side of the palace. The cool night breeze tousled his hair, a welcome calm against his uncharacteristically furrowed brow. Luffy's gaze was distant, lost in the vast ocean that stretched endlessly into the horizon. It was here that Rayleigh found him, the old pirate's steps quiet but assured. Seemed to be thinking hard there. Rayleigh's voice broke through the silence, a gentle tease in his tone. Luffy turned, managing a small smile. Just thinking about everything. It's big, isn't it? Tomorrow, I mean. Rayleigh leaned against the balcony railing, his eyes reflecting the starlight. Yeah, I would say it's pretty big. Just remember, those vows you make tomorrow, you'll need to make sure you keep them. You and Hancock will most likely be apart more than you are together on this journey, so keeping those vows may be harder than it seems. Luffy nodded slowly, the weight of Rayleigh's words sinking in. I know. Hancock's great, she really is. I just want to make sure I can be great for her too. I couldn't protect my friends 2 years ago, so I hope I can protect her no matter where I am. Rayleigh chuckled softly, surprised yet proud of how serious Luffy is taking all of this. You will be great for her, and I have no doubt you'll protect her. Just be the man you've always been, Luffy. That's clearly who she fell in love with. The two stood in silence for a moment as Luffy's eyes drifted back to the horizon with a thoughtful expression on his face. Meanwhile, Rayleigh continued to observe the more serious expression on the usually carefree pirate's face. You're more serious than usual tonight. Anything else on your mind? Luffy's shoulders tensed slightly, then relaxed as he sighed. It's just, I've been wondering about my crew. What they're doing now, where they are. If I knew where they were, maybe they'd come. His voice trailed off, filled with a mix of hope and uncertainty. Rayleigh raised his eyebrows, a hint of surprise in his features. It was unlike Luffy to dwell so much on what others thought, but it seemed the significance of Luffy's wedding day was weighing heavily on him. It's important to you that they're here? Yeah, Luffy responded, his tone softening. At first, I didn't get why Hancock was making such a big deal about the wedding, why it had to be in front of so many people. But the more I thought about it and heard her talk about it, the more I realized, I wish my crew was here to see this big day, as everyone keeps saying. Rayleigh nodded, understanding the depth of what Luffy was feeling. It's definitely a milestone. It's natural that you'd want them here considering you all have overcome great challenges together. Luffy leaned over the railing, looking down at his hands. Well, I mean they're more than just my crew. You know? They're more than friends now even. They feel like family. And all this, he gestured vaguely, referring to the wedding and all its preparations. This is supposed to be one of those times when you have everyone who matters around you. At least, that's what Hancock says. The truth is, Luffy, Rayleigh began, choosing his words carefully, your crew knows how much you care, even though they aren't here. This journey you're about to embark on with Hancock. It's another part of your adventure, one they'll want to celebrate with you, even from afar. Luffy smiled some, a trace of his usual cheer returning. You think so? Yup. Rayleigh affirmed with a confident nod. And who knows, maybe once you're all back together, you can introduce them to Hancock since she will be bringing you back to Sabaody. Yeah, you're right, Luffy said, his spirits lifting. Maybe we can even have a party. Rayleigh clapped him on the back, his eyes twinkling in the moonlight. That's the spirit. Now, I'm pretty sure your bride will come after me if I keep talking and not let you get any rest. Luffy chuckled, imagining Hancock's reaction. Thanks, Rayleigh. I guess I just needed someone to talk to about this. The older pirate smiled, pleased to see Luffy regaining his characteristic optimism. "Have a good night, Luffy. Remember, whatever tomorrow brings, you've got this." Luffy nodded, taking one last look at the island. "I'll remember that, goodnight." With those parting words, Luffy headed back inside, feeling a bit more prepared for the wedding day. As he walked through the silent halls of the palace, his thoughts were a mix of anticipation and excitement. Tomorrow wasn't just about the ceremony or the celebration. It was about starting a new chapter with Hancock by his side. Deep down, he felt the comforting presence of his crew in spirit, their unseen support bolstering him as he stepped towards a future filled with unknown adventures. As the first rays of dawn crept over Amazon Lily, the island was already humming with excitement and activity. Today was no ordinary day. It was the day their empress would marry Luffy, a union celebrated not only by the inhabitants of Amazon Lily but also by the spirits of the Kuja ancestors, it seemed, given the perfect weather. Hancock woke early that morning, her heart fluttering with anticipation and nerves. As she lay in her bed for a moment, listening to the distant sounds of the sea and the soft murmur of the Kuja warriors outside preparing for the celebration, a smile touched her lips. Everything was arranged, from the decorations that adorned the palace halls to the exquisite feast that would be served. Her sisters, Mari and Sonia, had been instrumental in ensuring every detail was perfect, allowing Hancock to focus on the personal significance of the day. Now, within her spacious chambers adorned with elegant decor and floral arrangements, Hancock stood gracefully in a silk white robe. Her eyes occasionally glanced across the room at the stunning wedding dress that awaited her. The breathtaking dress hung like a promise of the joyous commitments to come. Mari and Sonia busied themselves with final preparations, their voices filled with excitement and a touch of sisterly teasing. "Can you believe the day has finally come?" Mari asked, her eyes gleaming with happiness. "Your dream is about to become a reality, big sis." Hancock's lips curved into a smile. "It feels surreal," she confessed, her gaze drifting to the dress once more. "I'm thrilled, of course. However, it's more than just a dream, it's a beginning." Meanwhile, Luffy was facing his own set of challenges. The idea of wearing a suit, especially a white three-piece one with a purple tie and purple pocket square, was alien to him, and he fumbled with the fabric as if it were an opponent in battle. He managed to don the shirt and vest, which were relatively straightforward, but the tie was proving to be a real nemesis. With a heavy sigh of frustration, Luffy abandoned his half-hearted attempt at getting fully dressed and snuck out of his room, the jacket and the contentious accessories in hand. The halls of the palace were bustling with activity, yet Luffy moved almost unnoticed, his mind fixated on seeking help, leading him to Hancock's chambers. Before he could reach for the door, however, he was intercepted by a pair of Kuja warriors, their expressions a mix of surprise and mild reproach. "You can't go in there, Luffy," one of them said firmly, stepping in front of him to block his path. "It's bad luck to see the bride before the wedding." "But I need to talk to Hancock," Luffy protested, his frustration evident. He held up the tie and purple fabric helplessly, a clear symbol of his struggle. "These things are making me go crazy." Inside her chamber, Hancock, overhearing the commotion, sent Sonia to investigate. Sonia opened the door slightly and peered out, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of Luffy looking particularly distressed and out of place in his formal attire. "Luffy, what are you doing here?" Sonia asked, her voice a mixture of amusement and concern. Her question drew Hancock's attention, prompting her to drift closer to the door, curiosity piqued. Luffy glanced from Sonia to the slightly ajar door, his frustration temporarily forgotten as he glimpsed Hancock moving behind her sister. "I can't figure these things out," he admitted, holding it up for Sonia to see. "Can't Hancock help me since she wants me to wear them?" Sonia suppressed a smile. "Hold on," she said before turning to whisper to Hancock, who was now just behind the door, a soft smile gracing her lips upon hearing Luffy's voice. "Sister says to wait here. Let me help you with that tie and pocket square," Sonia offered, stepping out into the hallway, closing the door behind her to keep Hancock out of view. With practiced hands, Sonia quickly fixed the tie around Luffy's neck, her movements efficient before she turned her attention to properly folding the square. After Luffy pulled on the suit jacket, Sonia gingerly put the folded fabric in his pocket. "There," she said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. You look very handsome, Luffy. Luffy's expression softened, his earlier irritation replaced by a grin. Thanks, Sonia. Do you think Hancock will like this? The suit and all? She'll love it. I'm pretty sure that's why she picked it out for you. White and purple seem to suit you quite well, Sonia assured him confidently. And it's not just about the suit, Luffy. It's about you being there for her, standing by her today. That's what really matters. Reassured, Luffy nodded, his anxiety easing under Sonia's comforting words. I guess I'm ready then. I'm gonna go grab some food, he stated, his usual cheerful demeanor returning. Don't get anything on your suit, Sonia called after him as he had already turned and began running down the hall. As Sonia re-entered, Hancock, who had been silently listening, turned to her with a sparkle in her eyes. Is he all right now? She asked. Sonia nodded, her smile broadening. He's fine. Just Luffy being Luffy, worried about his suit. Although, he did try to peek around me a few times to try to get a glimpse of you before I shut the door. Hancock felt a blush color her cheeks as she smiled. I still can't believe that this day has arrived, she murmured, her thoughts drifting to the recent months she spent with Luffy leading up to this moment. I'm ready to start our forever. Minutes later, as Hancock was preparing to put on her dress, Elder Nyan burst into the room. Her expression a mix of amusement and exasperation as she announced, your fiancé has already made his way through the feast. Hancock couldn't help but giggle at the thought of Luffy, unable to resist the spread of delicacies prepared for their wedding day. Mari quickly chimed in to calm Nyan's nerves, don't worry, we've prepared extra, just in case. We know Luffy all too well, she assured with a knowing smile. There's plenty more hidden away in the kitchen. Sonia, meanwhile, carefully lifted Hancock's wedding dress from its stand, a stunning creation of fitted white fabric with a sweetheart neckline that flattered Hancock's figure while maintaining an air of bridal elegance. The dress was adorned with delicate lace accents that added a touch of regal sophistication. As Sonia helped Hancock step into the dress, she meticulously adjusted the fabric to ensure it fit flawlessly. She then proceeded to arrange Hancock's hair, ensuring that it covered the mark on her back, a reminder of her past that she preferred to keep hidden especially on such a joyful occasion. Finally, she helped adjust the veil atop her sister's head. Once fully dressed, Hancock stood before the large mirror in her room, taking in her reflection. The sight of herself in the wedding dress brought a wave of emotions. She looked every bit the empress she was, yet today, she was also a bride about to embark on a new journey. As the reality of the day began to fully settle in, a flutter of nerves tinged her excitement. Nyan, Mari, and Sonia gathered around Hancock, their expressions a mixture of awe and delight as they beheld her transformation. Each one was struck by how breathtakingly beautiful she looked, the dress accentuating figure. You look incredible, big sis, Sonia whispered, her voice filled with emotion. Mari nodded in agreement, her eyes shining with tears of joy. Luffy won't believe his eyes when he sees you walking towards him. Nyan took a deep breath, her earlier exasperation replaced by a profound sense of pride. You look beautiful, Snake Princess. Hancock met her reflection's gaze, her nerves smoothing into a confident calm. Thank you, all of you, she said genuinely. Today will be unforgettable. As the natives of Amazon Lily began to settle and the ceremonial area buzzed with the low murmur of excitement, Rayleigh found Luffy standing somewhat apart, looking out over the gathered crowd. The old pirate approached slowly and placed a gentle but firm hand on Luffy's shoulder. Luffy, you got a moment? I wanted to talk to you a little more about our conversation from last night. Luffy's response was a nod as Rayleigh guided him slightly away from the bustling crowd, seeking a more private moment for a conversation he felt was paramount. So, listen, I've known Hancock and her sisters for a long time, since they escaped the clutches of the celestial dragons. They've become like family to me, much like my own daughters, Rayleigh began, but paused a moment to give Luffy a moment to try to understand where this conversation would go. It's because of that, it's really important to me, and to her, that you truly understand what you're committing to today, and that you also take good care of her. Luffy looked up at him, his expression open and attentive but still marked by a hint of confusion. Take care of her? You told me last night you knew I could protect her, he responded earnestly, his tone suggesting he was trying to grasp the deeper implications of Rayleigh's words. Besides, Hancock is strong, so even if I couldn't get here right away, I know she can handle anything." Rayleigh nodded, appreciating Luffy's sincerity but recognizing the need to clarify his point further. "It's not just about protecting her from harm, Luffy. Like you said, she can handle herself pretty well in battle. Taking care of Hancock means being there for her emotionally, understanding her needs, and sometimes, putting those needs ahead of your own adventures. It means being present, not just physically but with your heart too." Luffy's brow furrowed slightly as he processed Rayleigh's explanations, the concept of emotional support mingling with his usual straightforward approach to life. "I know you care about her, Luffy, and I don't doubt your intentions," Rayleigh added, his voice softening. "But marriage, well, it's a partnership. I know you've talked about this with Hancock, but you need to support each other, even in ways that aren't always adventurous or exciting. Sometimes, it's just being there, listening and understanding." Luffy nodded slowly, a light of comprehension beginning to flicker in his eyes. "I get it. I need to be there for Hancock, not just when it's fun or when there's a big fight, but all the time, even when it's just normal stuff." Rayleigh's expression relaxed into a smile, proud of Luffy's willingness to understand. "That's right, and remember, Luffy, if you ever falter, if you ever forget, I'll be there to remind you. She's like a daughter to me, and I'm entrusting her happiness to you." As they continued to speak, Shaki approached, signaling that it was time for the ceremony to begin. Rayleigh gave Luffy's shoulder a final squeeze. "Looks like they need you up on that platform." Luffy, now more determined and with a newfound understanding of his role as Hancock's partner, nodded seriously. "I won't let you or Hancock down." Meanwhile, inside a small antechamber, Hancock, dressed in her breathtaking white wedding gown, stood waiting. Despite the confidence she usually exuded, another flutter of nerves tinged her usual poise. Her sisters hovered nearby, offering smiles of encouragement and adjusting her hair and veil one last time, ensuring they draped perfectly to cover the mark on her back. Elder Nyan, watching from a respectful distance before also moving to enter the grand hall to take her seat, admired Hancock's transformation. The Empress was a vision of regal beauty, yet Nyan could see the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her hands occasionally fidgeted with the delicate lace of her dress. It was a big day, perhaps the biggest in Hancock's life, and the weight of the moment was not lost on any of them. Hearing their cue, Nyan, followed by both of Hancock's sisters, exited to make their way down the aisle to where they would stand to support her. Just outside the chamber, Rayleigh stood by the closed double doors leading to the main hall where the ceremony would take place. His expression was thoughtful, almost reverent, as he prepared to perform one of his most cherished duties, giving Hancock away. As he turned to enter the antechamber, his eyes met Hancock's, and he offered her a reassuring smile. "Ready?" he asked gently, extending his hand towards her. Hancock took a deep breath, her eyes locking on Rayleigh's. "I am," she replied, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "This is real. My dream, it's happening." Rayleigh nodded, his gaze softening. "I gotta admit, you've surprised me with how much you've grown over these last 2 years," he said quietly as he took her hand to lead her towards the doors. "I'm proud of you, Hancock. Not just as the Empress, but as the woman who has faced her fears and her past so that she can love deeply." His words bolstered her, infusing a warmth that eased some of her nerves. "Thank you, Rayleigh," she murmured, her gratitude evident. Please do not let me fall." Rayleigh gave a gentle, reassuring chuckle, squeezing Hancock's hand slightly as they paused just outside the grand doors leading into the ceremony. "You're not going to fall, not while I'm here," he affirmed with a fatherly confidence. "And even if you stumble, Luffy will be there to catch you. That much I can guarantee." Hancock looked at Rayleigh, her expression full of gratitude. "I know Luffy wouldn't intentionally let me fall. He's shown his honor and his heart, time and again. But it's comforting to know you're also watching over us," she confessed, a slight smile touching her lips. Rayleigh's eyes twinkled with a mixture of pride and sentiment as he prepared to open the doors. "Well, just remember, if that boy ever steps out of line or hurts you, I'll be there to knock some sense into him," he said half-jokingly. This brought a soft laugh from Hancock, lightening the gravity of the moment. "Thank you, Rayleigh. That means everything to me," Hancock replied, her voice steadier. With a final nod, Rayleigh turned and signaled for the doors to be opened. As they swung outward, Rayleigh offered Hancock one more piece of encouragement. "All eyes will be on you today. Not just as a leader or a warrior, but as a woman embarking on a new journey of love and partnership. Your people are celebrating with you. The murmur of the crowd hushed as all eyes turned towards the entrance. Rayleigh led her down the aisle, his presence a steady force beside her. The path was lined with the vibrant colors of the Kuja's traditional decorations. Each step they took accompanied by the soft notes of a love song played by the island's musicians. At the end of the aisle, Luffy stood waiting. His gaze initially wandered over the decorations, taking in the elaborate setup that transformed the familiar palace into a ceremonial ground. However, as the doors opened and Hancock appeared, his attention snapped forward, his eyes widening in uncharacteristic surprise. She was beautiful, breathtakingly so, in a way that transcended her usual formidable presence. Her dress clung to her form in a way that highlighted her physique that caused Luffy's eyes to widen some. She's beautiful, he began to think as he felt a surge of emotions watching her approach: pride, joy, and an unexpected twinge of jealousy. He realized then that her beauty wasn't just for him to appreciate, it was there for the world to see. And that realization sparked a protectiveness he hadn't fully anticipated. It wasn't just that Hancock was beautiful. It was that she radiated a kind of confidence in herself that drew eyes effortlessly, and along with those eyes came the lustful desires and intentions of others. Memories came flooding back to him then, of overheard comments and compliments that men had made during their journey to Marineford and later, when they had ventured together to rescue her sisters from Burndy World. He remembered the way men looked at her, some with admiration, but most with a lustful desire. Now, watching her walk toward him, those remembered glances ignited a pang of jealousy that shot sharply through him. Luffy had always known Hancock was attractive, how could he not? But in the everyday tumult of their adventures, it had been just another aspect of who she was. Now, faced with the formal acknowledgement of their relationship and seeing her like this, adorned for their wedding day, it struck him more profoundly. He felt a fierce desire to protect her, to shield her from those prying eyes and comments. Not because he doubted her, never that, but because he suddenly understood the depth of his feelings toward her, feelings that went beyond the camaraderie and shared battles. Yet, Luffy's heart swelled, and the pang of jealousy dissipated as he remembered Hancock's words about their relationship. That she would only be his and he would only be hers. A smile broke across his face, one that reached his eyes and lit them with affection and a hint of mischief. Hancock, seeing Luffy's smile, felt her nerves begin to settle. His presence, his smile, was a reminder of why she was here, of the love they shared that was worth every moment of doubt and every challenge they had faced. When she finally reached the front, Rayleigh stepped back, and Luffy took Hancock's hands in his. The Kuja priestess, standing before them with a benevolent smile, began the ceremony. She spoke for a few moments of love and commitment, of the journeys both personal and shared, and of the bonds that were to be strengthened this day. As the ceremony continued, the Kuja priestess turned to address the couple, her voice carrying across the silent assembly with serene authority. We are gathered here today under the watchful gaze of not only each other, but our ancestors, to bind these two souls in the sacred bond of matrimony, she began, her words echoing the traditions of Amazon Lily. Now, before the spirits of our ancestors, you shall make vows that bind your fates together. These are not merely words to be later forgotten. They are the compass that will guide you through the storms and calms of life. Turning first to Luffy, she nodded solemnly. Monkey D. Luffy, do you take this woman to be your wife, to sail with her through all life's adventures, to protect and honor her, in freedom and in challenge, as long as you both shall live? Luffy's response was immediate, his voice strong and sure. Yeah, of course I do. I'm not gonna let anything bad happen to Hancock. His characteristic response drew quiet chuckles from the guests in attendance. The priestess then turned to Hancock, whose presence commanded the attention of every attendee. Empress Boa Hancock, do you take this man to be your husband, to stand with him against all who would challenge you, to cherish and respect him, on this island and across the endless seas, as long as you both shall live? Hancock's voice was clear and resonant as she replied, I do. I take Luffy to be my husband, to stand with him against all odds, to cherish and respect him, and to be by him as he accomplishes his dreams. With these vows, the priestess continued, her tone imbuing the moment with gravitas. You pledge not just to share a journey but to intertwine your souls, your dreams, and your destinies. May your love be as vast and enduring as the sea itself." She then asked them to exchange rings, and explained how the rings are symbolic of their commitment. Luffy, fumbling slightly with the small object due to his unfamiliarity with such delicate tasks, managed to slip the ring onto Hancock's finger, his actions clumsy yet endearing. Hancock's hands were steady as she placed the ring on Luffy's finger, her touch gentle and her expression filled with love. "Now, by the power vested in me by our ancestors and the laws of Amazon Lily, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may seal your vows with a kiss," the priestess declared, her voice warm with joy. Hancock wasted no time, leaning in to kiss Luffy passionately, a cheer erupting from those gathered. It was a kiss that spoke volumes, sealing their promises and solidifying their bond in the presence of their friends, Hancock's subjects, and the ancestral spirits of the island. Luffy surprisingly returned his kiss with equal fervor, as Hancock's hands softly cradled his face to draw him closer. As the kiss ended, Luffy, ever unpredictable, flashed a wide grin and unexpectedly scooped Hancock into his arms, bridal style. This spontaneous act elicited laughter and more cheers from the crowd. Hancock laughed, a sound of pure happiness, as she wrapped her arms around Luffy's neck, thoroughly enjoying the moment. They proceeded down the aisle in this unconventional manner, Luffy carrying Hancock with ease, his steps confident and jubilant. The assembled Kuja warriors and guests clapped rhythmically, their applause mingling with the joyful cries and the melodious backdrop of traditional Kuja music. Flower petals rained down upon them, creating a vibrant tapestry of colors under their feet. As they reached the end of the aisle, Luffy gently set Hancock down, taking her hand. The expression on his face was one of sheer triumph and delight, his eyes twinkling with the excitement of a new journey begun. Hancock, standing beside him, radiated grace and joy, her smile as brilliant as the sun. Stepping into the hall, Mari and Sonia greeted the newlyweds to assist Hancock with her dress. "Congrats, big sis. Let's go ahead and get you changed into your reception dress so you'll be a bit more comfortable," Mari suggested warmly, aware of the long evening ahead filled with dancing and festivities. Hancock nodded, her eyes sparkling with excitement. The wedding gown was stunning, but its formality and weight were not suited for the more relaxed atmosphere of the reception. "That sounds perfect," she answered before turning her attention to her new husband. "Darling, will you give me a few moments? You can go ahead and head out to the reception, I'll join you shortly." Sonia chimed in, "The dress has already been set up in your chambers, sister." Luffy, whose understanding was minimal at best in these situations, furrowed his brows as the sisters began guiding Hancock away and her hands slipped out of his grasp. "Wait, why'd I have to wait here? We're married now, right? So, I have to be with Hancock," he declared, a hint of confusion and stubbornness in his tone. Mari and Sonia exchanged a look, a silent conversation passing between them on how best to explain the situation to Luffy. Before they could respond, Luffy continued, his hand once again holding onto Hancock's. "I'll just wait for you in your room. I mean, you're just changing, right? So, I can wait," he suggested innocently. Hancock, slightly taken back by Luffy's straightforward suggestion, felt a blush spread across her cheeks at the implications. The idea of Luffy waiting in her room, close by as she changed, was both charming and felt slightly scandalous. However, the reminder that he was now her husband tempered her initial shock with a sense of intimacy that was both new and thrilling, albeit nerve-wracking. Luffy still couldn't fully grasp why Sonia and Mari insisted that he wait outside for Hancock. Shaking his head, his determination solidified. To ensure no further objections could be raised, he scooped Hancock up in his arms, bridal style, once again. Hancock, caught by surprise, blushed deeply, her words tumbling out in a flustered mix as she insisted, "Luffy, darling, I can walk. You can just hold my hand. It's not necessary to carry me to my room." Luffy, undeterred and holding her securely, quipped with a grin, "But it's way faster this way. The faster you change, the faster we can go get food." The simplicity and sincerity in his statement, so characteristically Luffy, softened her protest, turning her embarrassment into a reluctant smile. Mari and Sonia trailed behind, exchanging looks of amused resignation as they followed the newlyweds. Luffy guided Hancock into her chambers and onto her bed, gently setting her down before taking a seat next to her, The proximity in such a personal space sent a new wave of blush across Hancock's cheeks. The implications of them sitting together on her bed, as husband and wife, caused her heart to feel like it would beat out of her chest. Mari and Sonia's voices pulled her back from the edge of her reverie. Composing herself with a deep breath, Hancock leaned over and kissed Luffy's cheek. "I'll just be right behind that screen, okay?" she whispered, her voice filled with a shy affection. Luffy nodded in understanding, watching her as she stood and moved behind the changing screen set up in the corner of the room. Once alone, he sprawled back on the bed, placing his hands behind his head. His movement was restricted, a reminder of the unfamiliar suit he was still wearing. Frowning slightly at the discomfort, Luffy decided that perhaps he could maybe change his clothes since Hancock is doing the same. After a few minutes, Luffy got up and walked around to the other side of the screen without considering his actions. As he began speaking, "Hey Hancock, can I take off this?" he was abruptly cut off by the collective gasps and squeals of surprise from Mari, Sonia, and Hancock. The sisters moved swiftly, positioning themselves in front of Hancock, who was half-dressed, and scolding Luffy to stay on the other side. Luffy scratched his head, looking at them with a puzzled expression. "But I've seen her like this before," he remarked innocently, referring to the time he inadvertently fell into her bath upon first arriving on Amazon Lily and later when she revealed the mark on her back to him. Sonia, trying to maintain a semblance of decorum, responded, "That was different, Luffy. Please, just wait for us to finish here." Luffy, still not fully grasping why they keep getting upset with him in these situations, shrugged but complied, stepping back to the other side of the screen. Okay, he said, still bemused. "I'll just wait here then." Behind the screen, the sisters worked quickly to help Hancock into her second dress, a simpler, more comfortable outfit suitable for the reception. Despite the brief interruption, laughter began to bubble among them, easing the tension as they teased Hancock about her new husband's forward ways. Figuring it would be okay to go ahead to make himself more comfortable, Luffy began his attempt to free himself from the constraints of his formal attire. His brow furrowed in frustration as he kept yanking on the tie, wondering how to remove it. Hearing Hancock's gentle call, Luffy turned towards her, his face momentarily lighting up with a smile before it shifted back to frustration. "I can't get this thing off," he grumbled, continuing to tug on the tie. "Let me help you," she said, her voice filled with a warmth that made the moment unexpectedly intimate. Hancock stepped forward, her hands a soft smile. She loosened the knot and slid the tie from around his neck. As she folded the tie and set it aside, her fingers brushed against his neck, sending a subtle but undeniable charge through the air. Luffy, now freed from the tie, didn't hesitate to strip off the button-up shirt that had felt so foreign to him all day. The action brought a squeal from Hancock. "Luffy, you're being so forward today and we're not even alone." His brows furrowed as he looked up at Hancock with confusion on his face at her reaction. He grabbed the white vest that had been part of the ensemble and slipped it on, wearing it with the same ease as he did his iconic red vest. As Luffy adjusted the vest, feeling more like himself than he had all morning, Hancock found herself caught up in just watching him. The simple act of him changing his clothes, so intimate in this new context of their wedding day, struck her with the realization of how many small, everyday moments they would now share. "Much better," Luffy declared, turning back to Hancock with a satisfied grin. His eyes met hers, and he noticed the way she was looking at him, a look that held something deeper, more reflective. "What?" he asked, a hint of playful curiosity in his voice as he tilted his head. Hancock shook her head slightly, her smile deepening. "Nothing, dear," she murmured, stepping closer. "I just can't believe my dream has finally come true." Luffy's response was a broad, genuine smile. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around his wife in a hug to which she eagerly returned. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, the rest of the world, the waiting guests, the reception, the expectations, melted away. In that moment, they were just Luffy and Hancock, husband and wife. The quiet moment was soon disrupted by Mari, who gently cleared her throat to gain her sister's attention. "Big sis, I believe everyone is ready for you two to make an appearance at the reception." "Yes. Time to eat," Luffy eagerly shouted as he stepped out of Hancock's room, tightly holding her hand and pulling her behind him. As they emerged into the bustling reception, the atmosphere was charged with celebration. The kuja, gathered in the large, open space adorned with exotic flowers and vibrant decorations, cheered as Hancock and Luffy made their grand entrance. The couple was swiftly ushered to the head of the main table, which was lavishly spread with an assortment of dishes reflecting both Amazon Lily's traditional cuisine and some of Luffy's favorite foods. Luffy's eyes lit up at the sight of the feast before him. "I'm starving," he exclaimed with his usual exuberance, and without hesitation, he began to devour the food piled high on his plate. His enthusiasm was infectious, and soon laughter and chatter filled the air as everyone around them joined in the feast. Hancock, however, took a more measured approach. She ate slowly, her gaze sweeping over the gathered friends and family, absorbing the joy and love that filled the space. This was a momentous day, not just for her but for her entire island, and she wanted to cherish every second. After what seemed like an endless array of dishes, Luffy finally leaned back in his chair, patting his stomach with a satisfied grin. He then turned to Hancock, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "Let's dance," he declared, standing up and offering her his hand with an enthusiasm that could not be denied. Hancock hesitated for a moment, caught off guard by the sudden shift from dining to dancing. Dancing publicly was not something she typically did, especially not with the unrestrained vigor that Luffy exuded. However, when Luffy took both her hands and pulled her gently toward the dance floor, her reservations began to melt away. At first, her movements were stiff, her eyes darting around daring someone to say something. Meanwhile, Luffy, ever the embodiment of freedom and joy, kept smiling at her, his hands holding hers firmly. "Just follow me, and let's have fun," he urged, pulling her into the rhythm of the music. Gradually, Hancock's tension eased. She allowed the music and Luffy's infectious energy to guide her, and soon she was laughing, the sound mingling with the music and the soft rustle of her dress. As she let go of her inhibitions, she realized that this was exactly what she needed, a moment of pure joy with the man she loved. On the sidelines, their family and friends watched with varying expressions of happiness. Mari and Sonia shared a look of delight, seeing their sister so carefree for the first time in a very long time. Elder Nyan, her usual stern expression softened, nodded approvingly at the sight, her eyes twinkling with a rare warmth. Rayleigh and Shaggy stood together, their faces alight with smiles, proud and touched by the deep connection and happiness radiating from the couple. Rayleigh leaned over to Shaggy, his voice low but filled with emotion. "He's exactly what she needed, isn't he?" Shaggy nodded, her eyes not leaving the dancing couple. "Yes, and she's what he needed too. They balance each other out perfectly." The party continued well into the night, with Luffy and Hancock at the center of it all. The newlyweds danced, laughed, and celebrated with a freedom and joy that resonated throughout the entire gathering. That night, Luffy lay sprawled on the plush canopy bed, gazing up at the intricate designs above him, his mind replaying the whirlwind of festivities from earlier. The room was quiet now, the only sound the gentle hush of the breeze coming through the open windows. He was only wearing his shorts, the casual attire a stark contrast to the formal wear of earlier in the day. The day had been more fun than he had expected, and as he lay there, a thought nagged at him about his earlier realization. Luffy's eyes narrowed slightly as he thought back on all of his time with Hancock, specifically, all of the times they encountered other men. Their admiring glances towards Hancock weren't just in his imagination. They were real, and suddenly, painfully, understandable. Now lying in the calm of their room, the weight of those looks felt heavy, intrusive even. He understood now, truly understood, the lustful comments he'd overheard from various men throughout their travels. Comments about her body, her beauty, what they would do if they were alone with her. Before, he'd shrugged them off, more focused on the adventures and battles they faced together. But today, seeing her walk down the aisle, resplendent and radiant, those comments caused him to feel a sharp pang in his chest and what felt like anger coursing through him. Luffy's fists clenched involuntarily at the thought. It wasn't just that Hancock was his wife now, it was the realization that while he was out at sea, others might see her the way only he should. Just then, Hancock emerged from behind the changing screen, her silhouette framed by the soft moonlight. She was wearing a short red silk night dress that clung softly to her curves and her hair flowing over her shoulders. The sight of her made his breath catch in his throat. She was stunning, and in that moment, Luffy felt both incredibly lucky and intensely protective. Hancock paused a few steps away from the bed, once again feeling her heart flutter with nervousness. Even though they had been in close spaces before, sharing moments during their travels and nights of restful peace during Luffy's training, this was different. They were married now. This was their first night together as husband and wife. The significance of that fact wasn't lost on her, adding a layer of emotional intensity to the already charged atmosphere. She noticed Luffy's intense gaze, his brow furrowed in thought. Stepping closer, she could almost hear the whirlwind of his thoughts, feel the tension in his body language. "Luffy?" she ventured softly, climbing onto the bed and sitting beside him. Hancock's voice, soft and questioning, pulled Luffy back from the edge of his thoughts. As she sat next to him on the bed, the smooth fabric of her night dress whispering with each subtle consciously followed the contours of her form and the way the dress accentuated her figure and beauty. Luffy's eyes widened slightly as realized, perhaps more than even moments before, just how much Hancock stirred him. And if this is how he felt, he hated to think how other men would continue to react without his presence by her side. To Luffy, it wasn't merely about how she looked, though at that moment, the impact was undeniable. It was about everything she was, everything they had been through, and everything they promised to be to each other. Hancock, catching the change in his expression, tilted her head slightly, a small smile playing at her lips. "What is it, darling?" she asked, her tone light but curious. Luffy's response was a mix of emotions. "You're really beautiful, Hancock," he said, his voice carrying a hint of awe. Then, more seriously, he added, "and it makes me kinda mad." Hancock's smile faltered slightly at the mix of admiration and irritation in Luffy's voice. Her eyebrows drew together in a puzzled frown. "You're mad that I'm beautiful?" she asked, her tone filled with hurt, misunderstanding his intent. Luffy's eyes widened in alarm as he sat up quickly, hovering over her with a look of urgency. No, that's not what I mean," he rushed to explain, shaking his head vigorously. "I'm not mad about that. I'm mad because of how other guys talk about you, the things they say. It makes me angry 'cause they act like they can take you away to be theirs." He took a deep breath, his expression earnest. "Especially now," he continued, "when I'm about to go back to sailing with my crew. I just want to make sure you're okay here without me." Hancock listened, her initial hurt easing as she understood his concern. She reached up, her hand gently cupping his cheek. "Luffy, I can handle comments and looks. I've dealt with them long before I met you," she reassured him softly. "What matters to me is how you see me, and that you care so much to worry about these things." Luffy relaxed slightly at her touch, his posture softening as he leaned into her hand. "I know you can handle it. You're really strong, Hancock," he admitted, his voice laced with pride. "But now I just feel, I guess, more protective. I don't want anyone else to think they can just look at you or talk about you like that." Hancock smiled at this, her heart swelling with affection for the man beside her. "Luffy, your jealousy is kind of endearing, but remember, I chose you. I will always choose you. No one else holds my attention or my heart." "Thanks, Hancock. That means a lot," Luffy replied, visibly relieved. His gaze softened, filled with love and admiration for the woman beside him. "Just promise me you'll tell me if anything bothers you, 'kay?" "I promise, my love. Besides, I'm very happy, especially right now," Hancock affirmed, her voice warm with sincerity. In an impulse born from a moment brimming with tenderness and love, Hancock reached up with her other hand, pulling Luffy down to meet her lips. The kiss was soft and warm, filled with the depth of their feelings. Luffy's eyes widened in surprise at her initiative, but he quickly closed them, returning the kiss with equal passion. As their lips parted, Luffy fell back onto the bed, a broad smile spreading across his face. He reached for Hancock, his movements gentle but insistent, and tugged her closer. Without hesitation, Hancock shifted her position, laying her head on his chest, a gesture that had become a comforting habit during his training days. Luffy's arm wrapped around her securely, his hand stroking her hair softly as they settled into the quiet of the room. The rhythm of his heartbeat under her ear was a familiar and reassuring sound, a reminder of the many nights spent just like this, finding peace in each other's presence after long days of training. Hancock relaxed completely, her earlier nerves and the swirl of the day's emotions fading into a contented stillness. The warmth of Luffy's body, the steady beat of his heart, and the soft caress of his hand brought a profound sense of home. Luffy, feeling her relax against him, knew this was exactly where they both needed to be. The events of the day, the laughter, the vows, and now the quiet night, all of it showed his commitment and love for her. He smiled to himself, thinking how life with Hancock was full of more surprises and emotions than he had ever expected to experience. The night deepened around them, the soft rustle of the breeze through the windows and the distant sound of the sea providing a serene backdrop to their first night as a married couple. Here, in the quiet intimacy of their room, the world's demands and their responsibilities could wait. Tonight was about them, about the simple joy of being together, and about the life they were building with each loving moment shared. The morning sun rose slowly over Amazon Lily, its golden light spilling across the dense forests and into the bustling palace grounds. Many preparations were underway with servants hurrying along the palace corridors with trays of food, fresh linens, and decorations. Today wasn't like the others. The air buzzed with quiet anticipation, every path swept clean, every glance turned toward the horizon. Their empress was finally returning, but she wouldn't be the only one. Her husband, the man who'd once turned their world upside down, and his crew would also be arriving today. However, none of the talk and preparation seemed to matter to the small figure currently barreling down the palace steps at full speed. "No catch me," the toddler shrieked, her voice ringing through the courtyard. Lucy, barely 2 years old and wild like her father, tore through the carefully laid flower garlands recklessly, her little bare feet slapping against the stone. Her dark, wavy hair swayed with every determined step. "Lucy, slow down before you trip," Mari called after her, but the girl was already halfway down the path, giggling. "I fast," Lucy announced, swinging a stick above her head like a sword and nearly toppling over from the effort. A nearby guard barely managed to snatch a basket of fruits out of Lucy's path before she collided with it. Unbothered, the toddler spun on her heel and pointed her stick fiercely at the startled woman. "You no catch me," she shouted at the woman. The guard gave a small bow, humoring the child. "Of course, Princess Lucy. I don't believe anyone can catch you." Apparently satisfied, Lucy grinned and took off again, back towards the palace. Her face was pink from the heat, but she was still filled with energy. Sonia stepped outside just in time, crouching low at the top of the stairs, arms already open. "Come here, little whirlwind." Lucy paused for only a second, wondering if she wanted to be caught now, before deciding to run full force into her aunt's arms. The stick clattered to the ground beside them, quickly forgotten. Lucy, I know, whirl, whirl," she tried to mimic what Sonia had said, her tongue stumbling over the unfamiliar syllables. Sonia let out a quiet laugh and kissed the side of her niece's head, now holding her close. "Yes, little one," she replied, brushing the hair back from Lucy's face. "You're Monkey D. Lucy. That's more than enough, isn't it?" Lucy nodded as she clutched a handful of Sonia's long hair, playing absent-mindedly with the strands. Her energy was already beginning to fade, the excitement of the morning wearing thin. Sonia shifted Lucy higher on her hip as she made her way down the corridor toward the little princess's room. "You remember who's coming home today?" she asked quietly. Lucy didn't answer right away. Her thumb was tucked in her mouth now, and her head resting heavily on Sonia's shoulder. After a moment, she mumbled sleepily, "Mama." "That's right," Sonia smiled. "And your father will be here too." The thousand sunny sliced through the calm waters toward Amazon Lily, the island's towering cliffs already visible on the horizon. The ship was alive with movement, every straw hat busy preparing for their arrival. Nami stood near the helm, hands on her hips as she rattled off orders, her sharp voice cutting cleanly through the crisp morning air. "Jinbei, steady as we approach and keep an eye out for sea kings. Frankie, we may need help getting through the calm belt. Zoro, stop standing there and help." Zoro grunted from where he leaned against the mast, pushing off lazily, "TCH, I am helping." "Clearly, just make sure you assist with the sails as we prepare to dock," Nami ordered as she pointed towards the sails. With a low grumble, Zoro stalked off to help, muttering under his breath about bossy navigators. Meanwhile on the upper deck, Chopper was bustling between crates, carefully checking the contents of his medical bag. He had packed extra herbs, bandages, and medicines, just in case anyone on the island needed treatment. Luffy, perched on the figurehead with his legs swinging freely, stretched his arms above his head and grinned. I can't wait to eat," he shouted with pure delight, already picturing the feasts that surely awaited him. Robin approached him from the stairs, her steps unhurried and her expression stoic. She tilted her head to look up at her captain and study his reaction. "Aren't you also excited to see your wife and daughter?" she asked, her voice warm. Luffy turned toward her, still grinning. "Yeah, but don't forget the food," he declared without hesitation. "I bet Hancock had them make lots of meat." Robin smiled at her captain's excitement. "It's been nearly 2 years. You know, Lucy isn't going to be little like you probably remember." "I know," he said brightly. "I bet she's huge now. That means I can teach her all my fighting moves. It's gonna be awesome." Back on Amazon Lily, preparations were almost completed. Elder Nyan stood near the docks with Sonia and Mari by her side and Lucy trying to struggle out of their grasp so she can go play. "They're close," a scout called. "We can see the Straw Hat ship." "How long do you think it'll take before Luffy runs straight into the palace and starts eating without being invited in first?" Mari asked with amusement. "I'm honestly surprised he hasn't already launched himself from the ship," Sonia replied, crouched low as she adjusted the hem of Lucy's small purple dress. The toddler tugged at the fabric with increasing impatience, her little fingers bunching the soft material. Her hair, which had been tamed moments earlier, was already curling again at the edges, the humidity already working fast to undo their efforts. "Don't pull on your dress, little one," Sonia said gently, catching Lucy's hands. "You'll wrinkle your dress. You look just like your mother." Lucy pouted but stopped fussing for a moment as Sonia finished smoothing the last of the fabric into place. The tiny version of Hancock's purple dress looked adorable on the princess. It even had the Kuja Jolly Roger patterns stitched into the fabric. "I want Mama," Lucy whined, trying to wriggle free as she looked towards the shoreline at the approaching ship, believing it to be her mother's ship. "We're waiting here," Sonia said firmly, lifting Lucy up before she could make a break for it. Lucy protested as her legs kicked the air, trying to free herself from her aunt's grasp. "Your mother's coming soon and that's your father's ship. Aren't you excited to see him?" Lucy's expression shifted. Her little brows pinched together in a deep little scowl as she crossed her arms over her chest. "Want Mommy," she muttered. Sonia sighed and looked at Mari and then Elder Nyan before looking back down at Lucy. "I know, little one. She'll be here soon. Just a little longer." The Thousand Sunny coasted gently into the protected harbor. The crew disembarked one by one and made their way towards Hancock's sisters. Lucy, still in Sonia's arms, stiffened immediately. Her eyes grew wide as she took in the newcomers, who were not only loud and boisterous, but worst of all, men. Men were strangers in her world, and having grown up on the island of women, she wasn't sure what to think about all of this. She clung tighter to her aunt, fingers gripping Sonia's top so fiercely that Sonia had to adjust her hold. "It's all right, Lucy," Sonia murmured against her hair. "They're your daddy's friends, that means they're our friends too." Lucy didn't look convinced as her gaze shifted, searching the crowd of approaching unfamiliar faces, until it landed on one figure a short distance away. A tall woman with long, flowing black hair stood with her back to them, speaking quietly to an unfamiliar woman with orange hair. "Mommy," Lucy screamed, her voice cracking with desperate joy. Before Sonia could react, Lucy squirmed violently in her arms. Startled, Sonia tried to tighten her grip, but the little girl was already slipping out of her grasp. Her tiny feet hit the ground hard as she took off towards the raven-haired woman at foot. Sonia and Mari called out, reaching for the toddler, but she was too fast. Like a cannonball, Lucy barreled into the unsuspecting figure with a force that nearly knocked her over. Robin, who was in mid-conversation with Nami, stumbled forward, barely managing to catch herself against the sudden impact. Looking down, she found herself staring at a tiny child clinging fiercely to her legs. Kneeling down slowly, Robin pried Lucy's small hands from her legs with delicate care, crouching until they were eye to eye. "Hello, sweetheart," she said, her voice gentle. Lucy sniffled, confused, her arms still half reaching toward Robin. "Want Mommy," she whimpered, her bottom lip trembling. Robin's hands wrapped lightly around Lucy's own. "It's all right. I know that your mommy should be here very soon." Sonia rushed forward and quickly gathered Lucy into her arms. "I apologize, Robin. She's been waiting so long to see Hancock again, she must have thought." Robin shook her head, gently brushing a rogue curl behind Lucy's ear in attempt to comfort the toddler. "It's all right. I bet she's been very brave. Haven't you, sweetheart?" Lucy nodded as she clung tightly to Sonia, now burying her face against her aunt's shoulder. However, before anyone could say another word, a familiar voice rang out. "Hey, Lucy." In a flash, Luffy vaulted clear over the remaining few steps and landed directly in front of them, grinning from ear to ear. "Whoa! You've gotten so big," he exclaimed, practically vibrating with excitement. Lucy peeked out at the loud, smiling stranger, then immediately turned her face back into Sonia's shoulder, squeezing her eyes shut. Luffy's grin faltered slightly. "Oi, what's wrong?" he asked, stepping forward with open arms. "Come here, Lucy. It's me, your dad." He reached out gently, but the moment his hands brushed against her back, Lucy's small body stiffened like a board. She gave a panicked whimper, clinging to Sonia with everything she had. Luffy scratched the back of his head in confusion. "Is she hungry or something? We can go get some food." Robin placed a hand on Luffy's arm, drawing his attention. "I believe she's just a little overwhelmed right now, Captain. Just give her time." Luffy stared at his daughter like she was a puzzle he didn't understand. His hand fell back to his side, a frown flickering across his face for the briefest second before it brightened again. "I've got it. I just need to make her laugh," he said confidently, puffing out his chest. Ignoring Robin's warning, he immediately stretched his cheeks wide and made ridiculous faces. Lucy peeked out only once before letting out a small, startled squeak and hiding her face once again into Sonia's neck. "She's just shy right now, Luffy," Sonia said helpfully. "Yes, she just needs a few moments," as Robin stated. Mari added, though she sounded far less convinced. "It's all right, little one," Sonia soothed as she rocked Lucy gently. "He's your funny daddy that your mother always talks about," she whispered near the toddler's ear. Lucy shook her head firmly, her small arms tightening their grip. Meanwhile, Luffy stood there once again scratching his head. He truly didn't understand what was going on. He fought beings like Kaido and Big Mom without blinking, but somehow, winning over one tiny girl seemed like it was going to be the hardest challenge he's faced yet. Hours had slipped by since the Straw Hats docked on Amazon Lily, the island buzzing with more excitement than it has seen in a couple of years. The palace dining hall had been transformed to hold a grand feast for the Straw Hats. Long tables were piled high with steaming meats, tropical fruits, and rich desserts. Despite the noise, the smells, and the laughter coming from the palace, Lucy had barely moved from her place by the docks. She stood stiffly against Sonia's side, her small hands gripping her aunt's skirt tightly. Her eyes were fixed firmly on the glittering blue horizon, where the perfumed Yuta was finally coming into view. "We told you that your mother would be here soon," Mari said as she pointed towards the ship. Sonia smiled down at the little princess. "Just a few more minutes, little one," she stated, brushing her fingers through Lucy's hair. "Then you'll be able to spend time with both your mom and dad." At the mention of her father, Lucy's tiny hands tightened their hold on Sonia's skirt and her brows furrowed in quiet confusion. Everyone kept saying the loud, stretchy man was her dad, but it didn't make sense in her little mind. This man didn't match the picture her mother always kept close. "Want mommy?" she whispered pitifully, more to herself than her aunts. Behind them, the sound of footsteps and a delighted hum announced Luffy's arrival. He strolled toward the dock with a half-eaten piece of meat in hand, which was likely snuck from the feast meant for later, his eyes bright as he pointed toward the sea. "Looks like Hancock's almost here." The moment Lucy spotted him, her entire body went still. The excitement drained from her face, replaced by a wary frown. Without a word, she lifted her arms toward her aunt, silently asking to be held. As Sonia gathered her up, Lucy buried her face against her shoulder and whispered, "No want man, no want man," repeating it like a quiet, stubborn mantra. Sonia's expression softened. She rubbed Lucy's back and looked over her shoulder at the man approaching. "She's still adjusting, Luffy," she said, her voice calm but understanding. Luffy's grin faltered, just for a moment. He slowed to a stop, chewing what was left of his snack more slowly. His eyes drifted from the horizon where his wife's ship approached to his little girl, who clung to Sonia as if she couldn't get far enough from him. Suddenly, an idea that only Luffy would have popped into his mind, causing his face to light up. "I'll bring Hancock here faster," he announced proudly, puffing out his chest. "That'll cheer you up, right, Lucy?" Sonia and Mari looked at Luffy with worry, unsure of what kind of plan he was putting together. They watched as Luffy paced around, searching for something sturdy. His eyes landed on two thick stones embedded along the dock's edge, just the right distance apart. "Oh no," Mari muttered, realizing what was about to happen. "Luffy, don't!" Sonia tried to stop him, but it was already too late. With the practiced ease of someone who had spent years turning chaos into an art form, Luffy grabbed onto the two stones, stretching his arms until his body looked like a slingshot. "Watch this, Lucy," he yelled proudly, causing Lucy to peek out just in time to see him launch himself into the air. His laughing voice trailed behind him as he hurtled toward the incoming ship. On the deck of the perfumed Yuta, Hancock stood with her crew, regal and poised as always. "Empress," one of her warriors called urgently, pointing toward the sky. "Something is approaching." Hancock turned calmly, prepared for almost anything. However, what she saw and heard were not what she was expecting. "Hancock," the voice shouted, causing her composed facade to crack instantly. Before her crew could even react, Luffy slammed into the ship, grabbing hold of the main mast with an outstretched arm and swinging himself down in one smooth motion. "Hey, Hancock," he said brightly, completely unaffected by the dramatic entrance. For just a moment, the crew stared in stunned silence, then Hancock's entire being seemed to melt. Gone was the cool, untouchable Empress. In her place stood a woman who was absolutely in love with the man before her. "Darling," Hancock gasped, her voice filled with surprise and awe. Hancock rushed forward, her arms encircling Luffy's neck as she pressed herself tightly against him. The watching Kuja hastily turned their gazes away, some covering their faces in respectful embarrassment as their empress completely abandoned protocol for the man she loved. Luffy laughed and hugged her back just as tightly. "I missed you," he said simply. Hancock could barely hold back the tears that threatened to spill. And I whispered, her fingers trembling slightly where they clutched the fabric of his iconic vest. For a long moment, they stood there in the center of the deck, oblivious to everything else, the island drawing closer, the crew watching, and the feast that was waiting. The world had narrowed to just them. Hancock pulled back only slightly, her hands rising to cup Luffy's cheeks. "You must come home to me more often," she stated fervently. "Sometimes it is unbearable without you." Luffy's grin softened as he looked into Hancock's eyes. "Well, I'm here now, and Lucy's waiting for you by the dock." At the mention of their daughter, Hancock's heart squeezed so tightly it hurt. She hated the times she left Lucy on the island, but she also knew she couldn't risk Lucy's safety during some of their travels. "I must see her," she stated urgently. "Well then, let's go. Hang on, Hancock," he said with his usual excitement. He scooped her into his arms with an ease that made Hancock gasp, and before anyone could blink, he launched them both high into the sky. Luffy landed lightly on the dock, setting Hancock carefully on her feet with a bright grin. Still in her aunt's arms, but staring with wide eyes and trembling with barely contained excitement was Lucy. The little girl gave a cry that split the air. "Mama!" Lucy squirmed free without hesitation, her small feet pounding against the dock as she launched herself forward with all the force and speed her tiny body could muster. Dropping to her knees, Hancock opened her arms wide, catching her daughter. Lucy collided into her chest, clutching fistfuls of her mother's dress and hair as if terrified she might vanish again. "My sweet girl," Hancock whispered, her arms closing firmly around her little bundle of energy. Lucy squealed happily, as Hancock kissed her again and again, showering her small face with kisses. Luffy stepped closer, his hands tucked casually behind his head, his grin as wide as ever as he watched his wife and daughter interact. But as Hancock pulled back slightly to get a better look at her daughter, she felt a subtle shift. Lucy peeked over Hancock's shoulder, and the moment her blue eyes found Luffy standing nearby, her small brows furrowed. It was the toddler's attempt at a glare. The same kind of piercing glare Hancock had mastered long ago, but on Lucy's tiny face, it only made her look pouty and impossibly cute. Hancock blinked in confusion as she glanced from her husband, who now stood frozen in place, his smile fading slightly, to her sisters for some kind explanation. Mari rubbed the back of her neck awkwardly while Sonia cleared her throat gently, offering her sister a hesitant smile. "Big sis, we believe that Lucy hasn't quite warmed up to him." Hancock felt a pang in her chest. Had she failed in ensuring her daughter knew who Luffy was? She turned her attention fully to Lucy, who was still clinging to her, her little body pressed firmly against Hancock's chest. Even as Hancock slowly shifted to her feet, Lucy's arms locked around her neck like a lifeline. Still determined to soothe the tension she didn't fully understand, Hancock began walking slowly toward Luffy, adjusting Lucy so she rested more securely on her hip. However, as Hancock reached out her free hand toward Luffy, Lucy's grip tightened and a piercing cry shattered the moment. "No, my mommy," Lucy cried, her voice filled with panic and possessiveness. Both Hancock and Luffy froze at their daughter's outburst. Luffy's easygoing smile vanished and was replaced by uncharacteristic sadness. Meanwhile, Hancock stared at her daughter in stunned silence. She had imagined this moment countless times, her family together at last surrounded by warmth and laughter. She didn't even consider this possibility. Slowly, Hancock pressed her free hand against Lucy and felt the frantic pounding of her daughter's heart. She glanced up, her gaze meeting Luffy's, full of apology and heartbreak she didn't yet know how to fix. "I don't believe she means to be harsh, darling," Hancock said gently, though the words trembled slightly. Luffy nodded, forcing a small smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's okay," he said, scratching the back of his head. Lucy squeezed her eyes shut as if willing the strange man to disappear. Hancock continued to hold her close, one hand cupping the back of her head. She rocked gently in place, eyes once again looking to Luffy's face. He had done nothing wrong, but the look on his face made it seem as though he believed he did. How could Hancock explain to a 2-year-old that this loud, unpredictable, always hungry man was the very same person who'd held her as a newborn and would do anything for her? She had to find a way to bridge this gap. With Hancock's arrival, the feast officially began and quickly turned into a lively affair thanks to the Straw Hats. Close to the center of it all sat Luffy, Hancock, and Lucy. Luffy had wasted no time piling his plate high, grinning as he devoured skewer after skewer without so much as a pause to breathe. Hancock sat beside him, her demeanor still composed despite the casual air of the gathering. Next to her, tucked between her mother and her aunts, was Lucy. The little girl refused to eat. Her small hands lay idle in her lap, her purple kuja dress wrinkled slightly where she kept nervously gripping it. Her dark brows were drawn together in a tight, suspicious little frown as she scanned the noisy crowd. Every laugh, every unfamiliar voice, made her stiffen a little more. Sonia noticed first and leaned closer. "Aren't you hungry, little one?" she asked quietly. Lucy shook her head, her lip poking out in a small pout. Then, after a moment of glaring intently at the nearest group of Straw Hats, who were cracking jokes and just being generally loud, Lucy pointed with a tiny finger. "No like," she said firmly, her small voice just loud enough for her aunts to hear. They followed where she was pointing, which happened to be straight at Usopp, Frankie, Brooke, and Jinbei. Mari and Sonia exchanged a look before Mari spoke up. "They're our friends, Lucy." Lucy didn't look convinced. She twisted in her seat, glancing toward her mother, and her tiny frown deepened. Hancock sat with her chin resting in her hand, eyes soft as she looked at the strange man in the straw hat. Her smile was loving and affectionate, which didn't sit right with Lucy. Without a word, she slid off her chair and shuffled around the table, climbing clumsily onto her mother's lap. Her little legs flailed as she hoisted herself up. Then she wedged herself firmly between Hancock and the edge of the table, as if claiming the spot. One small hand clung to the fabric of her mother's dress, while her eyes locked onto Luffy. She didn't say a word, just sat there, silent and scowling as if daring the strange man to take her mother's affection. Luffy, still chewing, blinked at her sudden appearance. "Hey, Lucy," he said brightly, his mouth still half full. He held up a piece of meat skewered on a stick. "Look, it looks like a sword." He waved the skewer around dramatically, trying to make her laugh. Lucy stared at him flatly as she was not impressed with this man. Luffy's grin wavered at her lack of reaction. He tried again, this time attempting to balance fruit on his nose and crossing his eyes dramatically, but still nothing. Lucy leaned further into her mother, not even cracking a smile, which caused Luffy to slump a little. "Man, you're a tough kid. That even makes Livy laugh," he mumbled. Hancock smiled at her husband's attempts and gently combed her fingers through Lucy's hair. After a moment, Luffy leaned towards Lucy again. "Hey, do you like to play tag?" he asked hesitantly. Lucy narrowed her eyes at him like a tiny judge passing down a very serious sentence, then shook her head. "Ah, come on," Luffy whined almost like a child. "We can play after we eat." Hancock watched the exchange with amusement. She pressed a kiss to the crown of Lucy's head, then spoke in a sweet voice. "Would you like if I played too, my love?" she asked. Lucy okayed up at her, her face still serious. Hancock smiled tenderly. "We can all play, all right?" Lucy's small hands moved from gripping her mother's dress to her hands as she thought it over. Seconds seemed like minutes to both parents until Lucy gave a small nod. Almost immediately after, she added in a quiet voice, "No leave." Hancock pulled Lucy closer, resting her cheek lightly against her daughter's head. "I won't leave, I promise," Hancock stated, her voice full of warmth. Lucy's small body visibly relaxed against her mother at that. Satisfied she had secured her mother's attention, Lucy finally looked back at the table and at her neglected plate of food. Seeing an opportunity, Hancock tried to coax Lucy into eating as she lifted a small spoonful of rice toward her. Lucy eyed the spoon suspiciously for a moment, but Hancock continued to hold the spoon in front of her daughter's mouth. "If you want us to play together, then you must eat so you will have strength to run faster than both your father and I." With a little nod, Lucy opened her mouth and took the bite. Hancock's smile returned as she carefully fed her daughter another, and then another. Beside them, Luffy watched with a soft, odd expression on his face. He may not have won his daughter over yet, but watching Hancock and Lucy like this made him think that he didn't mind waiting. The courtyard echoed with laughter as the game of tag began. Lucy, clinging to Hancock's hand with iron determination, darted awkwardly across the grass, her little legs moving as fast as they could go. She didn't dare let go. Every few steps she'd tug on her mother's fingers to make sure she was still there. Chopper bounced along the edge of the courtyard, giggling so hard he nearly tripped over his own hooves instead of paying attention. Meanwhile, Olivia dashed in wide, uncoordinated circles to avoid being tagged, her laughter ringing out across the space. Up on the steps, Zoro sat back comfortably, one arm resting back on a step, the other wrapped loosely around Robin's waist. She sat on his lap, relaxed, her arm draped over his shoulders and fingers lightly brushing through his hair. They watched, content, as their daughter tore across the courtyard like a whirlwind. At the bottom of the steps, Nami stood with her arms folded, lips curved in a smile. Behind her, Sanji had draped himself around her, arms looped around her waist, chin tucked into the curve of her shoulder. Everywhere else around them, the remaining Straw Hats and Kuja had genuine smiles as they watched the game. Lucy squealed as Luffy came close to tagging her and pretended to just miss her, causing him to crash into a bush. "Mommy, freeze man," she shrieked suddenly, tugging Hancock's arm as Luffy stood back up. The request was urgent, almost commanding, as Lucy pointed fiercely toward Luffy as if expecting her mother to turn him to stone immediately. Laughter burst from the Straw Hats at the sheer cuteness of the demand. Hancock knelt down beside her daughter. "My love, you wish for me to use my powers?" Lucy nodded, gripping her mother's arm tighter. Hancock giggled as she met her husband's gaze as if silently asking him to stay still. Luffy, understanding the look, gave his wife a nod. Without hesitation, Hancock held her hands in front of her in the shape of a heart, gracefully, turning Luffy to stone. Luffy gasped and immediately froze in place. The courtyard went silent for a moment before Zoro spoke up. "Didn't know our captain could actually sit still for that long." Lucy giggled, the tension in her tiny body easing as she ran alongside Hancock toward the frozen Luffy. With a determined little smack of her hand against his knee, she shouted, "It," even though he was already it. Luffy let them scramble a few steps away before, unfreezing, without warning, his arm stretched forward, wrapping gently around Hancock's waist, and with a playful tug, he pulled himself close in an instant. "Now you're it, Hancock," he grinned, pressing a quick kiss to Hancock's cheek. Hancock swooned almost instantly at her husband's actions, her cheeks flushing at the unexpected affection. However, the lightheartedness was quickly broken. Lucy, having turned to see Luffy's arm wrapped around her mother, let a piercing cry. "No, My mama, she screamed, stamping her foot and trying to pull Luffy's arm off Hancock. The sudden outburst brought an immediate hush to the courtyard. Luffy's arm dropped instantly back to his side, and he looked down at his daughter, startled by her force. Lucy glared up at him, her small chest heaving with emotion. She pressed her body tightly against Hancock's leg, using her mother like a shield. Luffy knelt down carefully, his voice soft. "Hey, I'm not trying to take her away," he said, offering a smile. "I'm your dad, Lucy, so it's okay." But Lucy shook her head as she hid her face. Hancock knelt beside her daughter and gently cupped her face. "My love, you must be nice to your father." Lucy only shook her head harder, stubborn tears beginning to fall as she reached up desperately for Hancock to pick her up. Before Hancock could say more, a familiar voice carried across the courtyard. Robin, knowing that her captain and his family will need time alone, called to her daughter from where she sat on Zoro's lap. "Olivia, time to get ready for bed." Olivia skidded to a stop, flushed and laughing. She ran over to Luffy and Hancock first, offering them a bright smile. "Good night, Uncle Luffy. Good night, Auntie Hancock," she said in one breath, her words sweet and sincere. Then she ran to her father, who easily scooped her into his arms. Olivia giggled as Zoro tickled her sides, causing her to wiggle and kick playfully. Luffy watched the scene and felt a strange tightness in his chest. He wouldn't call it jealousy, but he knew what Olivia and Zoro share is what he wanted. A hollow ache followed the tightness as he continued to watch Zoro play with Olivia as they walked back into the palace. He wanted that with Lucy so badly it almost hurt. Beside him, Hancock had scooped Lucy into her arms. "It's also bedtime for you, my sweet girl," she said, her voice calming. Lucy clung tightly to her as they walked back toward the palace, her small head peeking suspiciously over Hancock's shoulder. Her wary eyes never left Luffy, as if she had drawn an invisible line that he wasn't allowed to cross. Inside the palace, the Kuja had already prepared Lucy's bed, which was piled with soft blankets and small plushy toys. Hancock set Lucy down gently on a cushioned seat to begin undoing the tiny ties of her dress. Luffy hovered nearby, his hands wringing awkwardly. "Do you need help?" he asked quietly. Hancock smiled at her husband, but before she could answer, Lucy's tiny hand shot out, pointing fiercely at him. "No," she said stubbornly, "you're not daddy." "Lucy," Hancock said, her voice firm, "he is your father and he is only trying to help." Lucy looked at her mother and shook her head, before turning back to Luffy with suspicious eyes. Luffy rubbed the back of his neck, smiling faintly even though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's okay, Hancock, I'll go wait in your room." As Luffy left the room, Hancock sighed in defeat. She gently cleaned up her daughter before changing her into a nightgown. The whole time, Lucy kept an eye on the door as if the strange man would re-enter. This man was not her dad, and he would not take her mother away. The night air was filled with warmth as it drifted through the open balcony doors, carrying the scent of the nearby gardens into Hancock's private chambers. Luffy lay on his back while Hancock was nestled against him, her head on his chest as she slept soundly. As soon as she had snuggled beside him, her breath evened out and her exhaustion from her weeks traveling at sea put her to sleep. However, Luffy remained awake. His eyes stared blankly at the intricate designs woven into the canopy above, his mind too restless to let him sleep. He sighed again, louder this time, the sound full of frustration, before mumbling, "I am heap saying I'm not?" Hancock stirred against him, her eyes fluttering open as she woke up slowly. She lifted herself slightly, propping on one elbow so she could look down at him. "Darling," she whispered, her voice sounding sleepy. "What's the matter?" Luffy exhaled roughly before blurting out, "Why doesn't Lucy like me? I'm her dad, but she keeps saying I'm not." Hancock's heart hurt at the rawness in his voice. She sat up a little more so she could run her fingers through his hair soothingly. "My love," she started softly, trying to find the right words. "I promise that I have spoken of you often to her. I've told her stories of her brave father, I've shown her you're wanted, described your smile, your laugh." However, her smile faded as she turned her gaze towards the open balcony as if searching for her next words. "I do believe it's the distance," she began again. "It's not just unfamiliarity, it's the fact that you're never here." Luffy blinked, caught off guard, but before he could say anything, she looked at him again, not with anger but with hurt. The first time you came home after we were married was because we were attacked," she continued, voice low, "and Lucy had just been born." She looked down at her hands now folded in her lap. "If we hadn't been attacked, would now be the first time you decided to return? Would now be the first time I've seen you in years since we just happened to cross each other's paths and fight the Cider Guild?" Luffy was fully sitting up, staring down at nothing in particular before looking at his wife. "But, I have to keep moving," he said, not defensive, just stating it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "I still gotta become king of the pirates." He shrugged, a little helpless. "And I talk to you. We talk a lot on the transponder snail, so that counts, right?" Hancock exhaled slowly as she held her husband's gaze. It wasn't a harsh gaze, but it wasn't her usual love-struck gaze. "Yes, Luffy. However, talking and being here aren't the same," she said softly. "You're chasing your dream, and I understand that. I'm not going to stop you." He opened his mouth to reply, but she held up a hand to stop him. "Lucy and we're your family. I know, so is your crew, but Luffy, we're your wife and daughter." Sometimes, she hesitated to try to find her next words. "Sometimes it feels like we're just a fallback between your adventures." Luffy's brows furrowed, not because he was angry, but because he didn't fully understand. "She's not afraid of you because she doesn't like you, regardless of what she may have tried to say," Hancock added gently. "She's afraid because she doesn't know you." That truth landed heavier than any accusation would have, causing Luffy look back down at his lap. "She's comfortable with those who are here every day. With me, her aunts, the guards, even Salome. We are her world, but to her, you're a picture I show her and a story I tell." "But you go on adventures too," he said quietly with confusion in his tone. "You're not always here either, and Lucy doesn't act that way with you." It wasn't said to win an argument, which Hancock knew. She knew her husband was speaking his thoughts out loud in order to understand. However, she didn't respond right away. She looked towards the open balcony doors again before letting out a slow breath. "I'm gone for a few weeks," she began quietly. "To keep threats away, for a supply mission, but I'm home for the months in between." She looked at him with a soft gaze. "She sees me, feels me hold her when she has nightmares, hears my voice every morning. I don't have to remind her who I am." Her words weren't mean to hurt Luffy, but she saw him further deflate under her statements. "She knows me in the everyday ways. You're her father, yes, but right now, you're still, well, you're a story." She didn't say that with blame, but with sadness. "She wants to know her father, it's obvious in the way she stares at your wanted poster," Hancock added. "But she needs time to feel safe with you, and that time only comes if you're here." Luffy didn't respond, he just fell back onto the bed staring up at the canopy again. "She'll come around," Hancock whispered as she leaned down and kissed him gently. "She just needs time, my love. Just be present with her over the next few days." Outside the chamber doors, Salome coiled lazily. The giant snake's keen eyes watched over the palace. Beside her, two Kuja guards kept silent watch, their own snakes coiled around their arms. Moments later, the sound of tiny, bare feet walking towards them broke the quiet. From the shadows of the hallway, little Lucy emerged, her nightgown slightly rumpled, and her hair tumbling all around her face. Her eyes were heavy with sleep and her thumb was tucked into her mouth as she toddled forward. Salome raised her massive head and tilted it curiously as Lucy stopped a few steps in front. The little princess tilted her head up and slipped her thumb out of her mouth to reach both hands up towards the snake. Up. The guards exchanged a look but said nothing. They knew better than to intervene between the empress daughter and her Salome, understanding what the princess was asking, lowered herself completely to the ground. With a few clumsy attempts, Lucy climbed onto the snake and wrapped her arms around her. Recognizing her intent, the guards moved to quietly open the heavy doors to Hancock's private quarters. Salome slithered inside with surprising grace while making sure Lucy stayed balanced. Luffy and Hancock both sat up straight, turning towards the movement. Their conversation stilled entirely when they saw Salome carefully lift Lucy up onto the bed. Lucy stumbled as she tried to walk on the bed before dropping to her knees and reached out her hands towards her mother. Hancock smiled warmly, the weight from her conversation with Luffy seeming to dissolve in an instant. "Come here, my love." Lucy crawled straight into her arms, burying her face against Hancock's chest with a relieved sigh. Hancock pressed her cheek against the crown of her daughter's head, holding her close. From across the bed, Luffy watched them with quiet awe, his chest tightening all over again. Lucy peeked out once over her mother's arm, and upon seeing Luffy sitting there, watching, she tucked herself tighter against Hancock. Luffy slumped yet again as his gaze fell back down to his lap. Hancock caught his look and tried to give him a reassuring gaze. Time, she thought to herself. Time and patience, darling. She will find her way to you. Hancock shifted carefully on the bed, keeping a steady hold on Lucy. The little girl was already relaxing in her mother's embrace. With great care, Hancock laid Lucy down between herself and Luffy, silently hoping that a little proximity might help their daughter grow used to her father's presence. At first, Hancock believed it was working. However, the moment Hancock fully laid back, Lucy made a soft, disgruntled noise and began wiggling closer, pressing herself so firmly against Hancock's side that it was like the child were trying to bury herself underneath. Hancock sighed softly as she turned on her side to face both her husband and daughter, determined to stay patient no matter how long it took. Lucy, still half awake, shifted too. She turned on her side so that she faced Luffy directly, her small back pressing tightly into Hancock's chest and stomach. Her tiny hand clutched her mother's that was draped over her side. She looked like she was keeping watch and guarding what was hers. Luffy, understanding what she was doing, didn't move closer. He just laid flat on his back, arms at his sides, staring blankly above him. Slowly, the tension went away, causing Lucy's eyelids to flutter closed. Hancock watched her daughter for a few moments longer. Then, without a word, her own exhaustion pulled her under once more, her hand still protectively over Lucy's side. Minutes seemed to turn into hours for Luffy as he laid there alone with his thoughts. Finally, unable to bow ache inside him, he sat up quietly and swung his legs over the side of the bed with slow movements to keep from waking his family. He made his way out onto the balcony, leaning his arms against the stone railing, and stared out over the darkened island. The jungle stretching out endlessly, and the faint glow of torches marked the distant village paths. Luffy loved it here because it was part of Hancock and home to their daughter. But, standing here now, feeling the weight and ache in his chest, Luffy realized something he rarely thought about. Some battles weren't fought with fists, some took patience and heart. I'm your dad, Lucy, and I'm going to show you that I am, he thought, clenching his hands into fists, no matter how long it takes. The soft light of dawn crept into Hancock's chambers, moving lightly over the massive bed where mother and daughter still slept. Only the faint chirps of early morning birds and the gentle rustle of leaves broke the stillness of the morning. Lucy shifted first, a small frown on her face as she stirred. She gave a soft, sleepy whimper as her eyes opened some. For a moment, she stayed pressed against her mother, seeking the familiar warmth before pushing herself up slowly. Something seemed different to the toddler. She blinked her still tired eyes and looked around the room. Her mother was still there, her breathing deep, and even as she remained asleep, Lucy's small face scrunched up as she realized the space where the strange man had been was empty. She sat up straighter, wobbling slightly, and looked around the room with curiosity. Her little hands gripped the edge of the sheet, and she turned toward the open balcony doors. There she saw the strange man leaning against the railing with his back to her. Lucy's frown softened slightly, almost as if in relief. Though she didn't fully realize it, she slipped down off the bed and made her way towards the open doors. She stopped just before the threshold of the balcony and watched the man everyone claimed was her father. Luffy was staring out over the island, his hat pushed back slightly, his hair messy and wild in the breeze. His arms rested casually against the stone rail as if he was lost in thought. He knew Lucy was there, but didn't want to risk her running off or waking Hancock. Meanwhile, Lucy tilted her head, studying him the way only a toddler could. She could have gone back to bed or called for her mom, but she didn't. Instead, she stayed by the door, watching this man with curiosity. After a few moments, pretending to sense her presence, Luffy slowly turned his head and looked at his daughter. His face lit up with a smile. "Morning, Lucy," he said softly, sitting on the floor of the balcony to make himself seem smaller. He crossed his legs and rested his arms loosely over his knees. "Did you sleep good?" Lucy shifted her weight back and forth in uncertainty, glancing behind her to see that her mother was still curled among the sheets asleep. Then her wide eyes flicked back to Luffy. Luffy noticed that while she was still hesitant, there was something else in her eyes, as if she was curious and not afraid. He decided not to speak further or force her to come to him. He wanted to do as Hancock said, to just be present. He rested his chin on one hand and watched her, smiling warmly. Lucy's brow furrowed as she thought hard about everything that's happened since yesterday. Then without a word, she toddled across the room, back toward the bed, but she wasn't climbing into it. She made her way to a nearby table where Hancock had set a small collection of precious things, one of which included a rolled-up piece of paper. Lucy grabbed the paper and unrolled it clumsily. She made her way back towards the balcony and this time stopped just in front of Luffy. Very seriously she pointed at the poster and said with confidence, "My daddy." Luffy recognized the wanted poster immediately. One of his more recent ones from Wano where he was shown grinning wildly in his Gear 5 form. His hair was stark white and clothes just as white. Lucy kept her tiny finger pointed firmly at the white-haired, laughing figure on the poster. For a moment Luffy just stared between her and the poster as everything finally clicked into place. Finally, a slow, wide smile spread across his face. He closed his eyes and took a deep centering breath and with a quiet hum of energy, his body began to shift. The transformation was almost dreamlike. His hair turned bright white, his simple clothes melted into a brilliant white trimmed with some purple. Even the air around him seemed to be filled with a wild, joyous energy. When he opened his eyes again, Lucy gasped audibly, her whole body straightening in awe. The man who had been a stranger was suddenly familiar. He matched the funny man from the poster, the one her mother had shown her so many times. He is the man that laughed and had cool fighting moves and made the world seem lighter. Luffy laughed a big, bright, boundless laugh that was full of life. It filled the whole balcony with warmth, causing Lucy's face to break into a smile. From the bed, Hancock stirred at the immense power she sensed along with the laughter. She reached out instinctively, searching for the warm weight of her daughter and husband but found only emptiness. Her eyes snapped open. Seeing the balcony doors still open, and still sensing this immense power, Hancock hurried towards the doorway with concern. What she saw made her stop all movement. There, under the soft glow of the early morning sun, sat Luffy, his Gear 5 form incredible to witness. In front of him was their daughter, laughing with him. Luffy looked over Lucy's head, causing the toddler to turn around and see her mother. "Mama," she squealed joyfully as she pointed towards Luffy. "Look, Daddy." As if to prove that he is her father, she lifted up his wanted poster. Hancock's heart melted so quickly she felt breathless. Her hand rose instinctively to cover her mouth, overcome by the sight. She stepped onto the balcony and Lucy immediately ran to her, throwing her arms around her legs with happiness. Luffy watched them both with his trademark grin in place. He felt relief that his daughter finally recognized him. A couple days later, the smell of breakfast filled the air as the Straw Hats and Kuja all gathered to eat. At one of the central tables, surrounded by laughter and chatter, Lucy sat between Hancock and Luffy. It hadn't been anyone's idea for Lucy to sit there, she had chosen the spot herself. Though she was still leaning noticeably closer to Hancock's side, her posture was different now, it was less tense. Her blue eyes looked towards Luffy more often, no longer filled with wary suspicion but with something closer to playfulness and curiosity. Nearby, Mari and Sonia sat together, sharing a plate of fruit, their eyes warm as they watched their niece. "She's finally laughing when he jokes around," Sonia stated. Lucy let out another small giggle as Luffy stacked 4 biscuits onto his forehead and made a cross-eyed face until one by one they fell. Each biscuit bounced off his nose, drawing a few chuckles from the crew. Lucy clapped her hands and shouted, "Again, Daddy." Hearing their daughter call Luffy, that made Hancock's face light up with a smile. A few days ago, she wouldn't even smile at him. But now she was laughing and calling him Daddy. Even if she was still shy and preferred her mother's comfort, Hancock couldn't be happier. After breakfast, as the plates were being cleared and plans discussed for the day, Luffy leaned closer to his daughter, his voice full of excitement. "Hey Lucy," he began brightly, "wanna come see my ship?" Lucy froze for a moment. The idea of leaving the palace, stepping onto a stranger's ship, even her father's, was a big one. She turned her wide eyes up to her mother and saw Hancock smiling down at her. Lucy thought as hard as a toddler could before reaching one small hand towards Hancock's, clutching her hand tightly. For a second, Luffy felt a little disappointment, thinking she didn't want to go, but motion caught his attention. Lucy stretched her other hand out toward him. She didn't say anything, but the small offer of trust was enough to make Luffy smile. Together, they walked through the palace grounds, heading toward the dock where the Thousand Sunny awaited. Lucy clutched her parents' hands tightly, her little fists squeezing with nervous excitement. When they reached the dock, Lucy's eyes grew wide as she took in the sheer size of Sunny. Luffy grinned proudly at his daughter's reaction. "This is Sunny, she's super tough just like you," he stated as he'd playfully nudged Lucy. Luffy launched himself onto the deck and landed with a solid thud. Lucy's eyes went wide at the sudden motion, her mouth falling open as she watched him rise to his full height with that wild grin still plastered on his face. Before anyone could stop him, Luffy stretched both arms out, one wrapping around Hancock's waist, the other scooping up Lucy. Hancock gasped softly, hands instinctively grabbing hold of Luffy's arm to steady herself as the world suddenly shifted around her. She hadn't been expecting the speed, the strength of his pull, or the way her body collided with his. By the time her feet touched the deck, she found herself pressed firmly to his chest. Her breath caught, just for a moment at their proximity. Meanwhile, Lucy squealed with delight from where she dangled in Luffy's other arm, her legs kicking wildly in the air. "I fly," she shouted, eyes wide with amazement. Luffy laughed as he shifted her to his side, holding her snug against him. Lucy clung to his vest like a koala, her hair a mess and her face flushed with excitement. "Daddy, again," she shouted, grinning up at him. Hancock leaned in, brushing her lips against his cheek in a quick kiss. "You'll pay for that stunt later, my love," she murmured near his ear. Luffy blinked in confusion, then laughed. "But she liked it, that means I'm not in trouble, right?" Hancock arched a brow, lips curving into something sly as she spoke up loud enough for only him to hear. "Oh, darling, that wasn't about Lucy," she said softly, her fingers trailing down his chest before she pulled back with practiced grace. "I'm the one you scooped without warning." She let the silence linger for half a beat, just enough for her meaning to sink in, then smiled sweetly and added, "And you'll be making it up to me tonight." Luffy blinked at her, processing what she meant, then his grin returned. "Oh, you mean like you want extra meat at dinner?" he asked brightly, nodding like he'd cracked some secret code. "Do you want me to get Sanji to make you some?" Hancock stared at him for a moment in disbelief before letting out a laugh. "Oh, Luffy," she shook her head as her laughter continued. "You're lucky you're handsome." Luffy furrowed his brows in confusion, wondering what that has to do with meat. Lucy watched her mother laugh, before she turned to her father. "Daddy's silly," she declared with childlike authority. Hancock smiled as she reached over and brushed a strand of hair behind Lucy's ear. "Yes, he is, very silly." Luffy grinned again at the comment. "Come on," he said with sudden excitement, gently passing Lucy into Hancock's arms. "I gotta show you everything." And just like that, he was off, bounding from one end of the ship to the other, calling out everything with childlike enthusiasm. From the docking station to the crow's nest, he moved fast, trying everything he could to make Lucy laugh while he explained things. Hancock noticed that every time Lucy giggled, Luffy seemed to light up like the sun. As their tour came to a close, the family found themselves standing at the front of Sunny. "That right there," Luffy said as he pointed towards the figurehead, "that's my special seat." Lucy tilted her head intrigued as she listened to her dad continue. "I always sit up there when we explore. It's the best seat on the whole ship." Then Luffy reached out somewhat hesitantly towards Lucy. "Want to see it too?" Lucy froze for a moment, then nodded. She stretched out her arms and was quickly scooped up by her father. Lucy turned towards her mother and reached out a hand as if silently asking her to come with her. Hancock kissed her daughter's forehead. "You'll be all right, my love. You're going to fly again," she stated encouragingly. Lucy's eyes lit up at the word and clung to her father to brace herself. With his free arm, Luffy stretched forward, grabbing a hold of the figurehead's mane and launched them into the air. Lucy squealed in surprise, then burst into delighted laughter as she gripped her father tightly. Luffy kept her close the whole way, laughing too. "Don't worry, Luce, I won't let you fall." They landed lightly on the figurehead. The view of the island looked incredible from where they stood. The wind was a little stronger from atop the figurehead, causing Luffy to sit down and hold her on his lap, his arms loosely around her to keep her safe. Lucy looked around, her eyes still wide with wonder. The sound of seagulls circled high above, and somewhere in the distance, she could still hear the faint voices of the Kuja warriors back on shore. The ship creaked beneath them with each slow sway of the tide, and for a few long moments, Lucy didn't say a word. Her small hands held onto her father's hands and she began to relax. "Daddy?" Lucy asked quietly before turning in his lap to face him, causing Luffy to look down at her and patiently wait for her to continue. "Daddy, no leave," she said, wrapping her arms around his middle and clinging to him the best she could. Luffy wrapped his arms around her, his chin resting lightly against the top of her head as he held her. "Oh, well, I do have to leave soon," he replied quietly. "But I'll come back every time, I promise, Luce." From the deck, Hancock had been both watching and listening. When she saw Lucy tuck her face into Luffy's chest, she felt her throat tighten. She knows exactly how her daughter feels. A few days later, the sun had just started to dip low over Amazon Lily, casting long shadows across the garden paths. For once, the grounds were quiet, no straw hat parties, no training, and no Kuja finishing any work for the evening. Instead, there was the soft sound of bare feet on stone, followed by a delighted giggle. Lucy ran ahead a stone pathway, her father's straw hat bouncing with each step. Luffy chased behind her, letting her run just out of his reach. "I'm gonna get you, Luce," he called, voice full of joy. "No," Lucy squealed, turning with a burst of speed that helped her barely dodge her father's grasp. From the steps overlooking the gardens, Hancock sat reclined back with Robin and Nami lounging comfortably on both sides of her. The three women watched in companionable silence, eyes following the tiny straw-hatted figure darting around the path. "She is quite fast for a toddler," Robin commented softly with a smile. "She has trouble at times, though," Hancock replied with fond exasperation. "She's his daughter, after all." Nami giggled from beside them. "At least she can't launch herself all over the island with his ability." Down below, a rustle through the foliage signaled the arrival of a familiar guardian of both Hancock and Lucy. "OME," Lucy shouted with excitement. Salome quickly slithered out and wrapped her tail around the toddler, lifting her into the air. The massive serpent moved quickly out of Luffy's way right before caught up to them. "Hey, no teaming up. That's cheating," he yelled, grinning as Lucy held onto the snake's body. "Hide, she squealed as Luffy jumped towards Salome and Lucy to get them both. Salome hissed at Luffy as she hid behind a tall bush, protectively curling around the toddler. Luffy dropped into a crouch nearby pretending to search. "Where'd they go? I know I saw a tiny pirate run this way." Lucy covered her mouth to stifle another laugh as her father continued to walk by them in search. From the steps, Hancock continued to watch the scene unfold. She hadn't said much to her Straw Hat companions over the last few minutes. What daughter together like this meant everything to her. Robin's eyes followed the little girl who had just jumped out from her hiding place to run in circles around the man chasing her. "It looks like they've become close rather quickly," she commented. "She was confused at first, as you both know," Hancock began, her voice soft as she recalled the last few days. "For so long, all she had of him were my stories and his wanted poster. The one where his hair and clothes are stark white." Robin and Nami exchanged knowing glances, faint smiles forming like they already saw where the story was headed. "She didn't recognize this version of him," Hancock continued. To her, her father was the laughing man in the poster, practically glowing white, full of joy, but when a loud man with black hair, a red vest, and blue shorts appeared, nothing about him matched in her mind. She gave a small, amused shake of her head as she thought back. "I tried to explain. I thought maybe she was just overwhelmed or not used to his presence. But how do you explain something like that to a 2-year-old? We didn't realize she already had an image of her father and the Luffy in front of her simply didn't fit it." Nami tilted her head slightly in curiosity. "So what changed? Looking at them now, you'd never guess." Hancock's gaze drifted toward the garden again. Lucy was squealing with delight as Luffy let her sit on his shoulders and give him commands as if she was a captain. "It was a few mornings ago," Hancock said, turning back to them. "I felt it first, that power. I have never felt anything quite like it, especially from him. I was worried something was happening to the island until I heard laughter. When I stepped outside, there he was." She paused, voice softening again. White hair, white clothes, that same wide, wild smile from the poster. Robin's expression softened further. And how did Lucy react? Hancock's full smile returned. She stared at him like she'd just solved a puzzle. Then she screamed, "Look, Daddy," to me and hugged me in her excitement. She kept looking between the poster and her father as if to prove to me and even herself they were the same. The silence that followed was warm, as if all three women were replaying the scene in their minds. Robin finally asked, "How were they after that?" There was still hesitation. "Which you have witnessed," Hancock admitted. "She clung to me anytime he was too loud or became close too fast. But Luffy," she exhaled, something fond slipping into her voice as it almost did when she talked about her husband. "He never backed off, but he did not push himself into her space. He just stayed present, close enough for her to run to him when she was ready." She watched as Lucy laughed and playfully pushed her dad, causing him to fall back in exaggeration and groan dramatically. "And now? You'd have to pry her out of his arms," Hancock stated softly. The laughter from the garden carried on, but the women on the steps had fallen quiet again as something within Hancock had shifted. It was subtle in the way Hancock's posture tensed, the way her fingers wrung together, her eyes no longer following Lucy but focused somewhere far off. Robin noticed first and tilted her head slightly, the breeze catching the ends of her hair as she studied Hancock's expression. There was something heavy that quickly began to weigh on her. "What is it?" Robin asked softly, her voice low enough that it didn't completely interrupt the peace. Hancock blinked, then slowly turned her gaze toward her. She didn't answer at first. Nami, sensing the shift too, looked over and waited. Hancock opened her mouth, closed it again, and then let her gaze drift back toward the garden before drawing in a long breath. "I don't want him to leave." It came out rawer than she intended. Her throat tightened the moment she said it. "I keep watching him with her, laughing, playing, being here with us. Each passing day brings us one day closer to when you all will leave for your next adventure. I feel like there's something stuck in my chest. It's not like I haven't said goodbye to him before," Hancock continued, her gaze locked on Luffy as he twirled Lucy gently in the air, both of them radiant in the golden light. "But this one feels different, harder even." She blinked, trying to chase the wetness from her eyes before it could fall. "Lucy's already emotional whenever I leave. She cries and clings to me, but I always come back. Everyone knows when I will return." She hesitated and took a moment to calm herself before continuing. "But when he leaves, I don't know when she'll see him again. I don't know when I'll see him again. And I can already see it, the moment he boards your ship, and she realizes he's really going. I can already hear her cry." Her voice broke, just a little, and she closed her eyes to steady herself yet again. Robin's hand reached out gently, resting against Hancock's forearm. "She's strong," Robin said softly. "Because you are strong. You will still be here for her when we depart, and he'll come back." Hancock nodded, though her throat burned. "I know, but strength doesn't make missing someone easier. Especially not when you're two and have finally met your father." She exhaled through her nose, quiet and pained. "And there's nothing I can do to soften it. She's just now starting to love him freely. And now we have to let him go again." Nami reached over then, her hand covering Hancock's where it was clenched into a fist. "Well then, we will plan accordingly and make sure you know when we'll be able to visit, or if we're even close when you're on one of your voyages." The halls of the palace had grown quiet as most of the Kuja were asleep. The warmth of the day had long faded into a cool, gentle breeze that rolled in from the sea. The curtains swayed softly in the moonlight, brushing against the open balcony doors where Hancock stood alone, bathed in silver glow. Her hands rested on the edge of the stone railing and her fingers curled slightly as she stared out at the horizon. Somewhere out there held her husband's next adventure, and tomorrow morning he would be leaving. Luffy had insisted on putting Lucy to bed. She'd clung to him after dinner, sleepy-eyed and stubborn, declaring that only he could tuck her in and that he had to tell the story. Hancock had stepped aside without a word, watching them disappear hand in hand toward Lucy's room. They'd told Lucy that morning that Luffy would be leaving soon with his crew on the Sunny. Lucy had nodded, big eyes blinking like she understood. All day, she'd never once let go of his hand for more than a few minutes. Now, with the weight of it pressing down, Hancock stood still, eyes fixed on the stars above the tree line, the ache she'd carried all day settling into something heavier. It always came to this, the goodbye. No matter how beautiful the days in between had been, this moment always loomed over her. The creak of her chamber's doors reached her ears, followed by footsteps. She didn't turn right away. Luffy stepped out onto the balcony behind her, barefoot and quiet. His voice broke the silence, low and soft. "She's asleep," he said. "Tried to stay awake to see the stars with me, but she couldn't fight it." Hancock let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh, almost. "She held your hand the entire dinner," she murmured, not turning. "Didn't even let me hold her without checking to see if you were still in the room." Luffy walked up behind her, stopping just a few steps away. "Yeah, she's been sticking to me like crazy." There was fondness in his voice, but it also carried an edge of sadness. "I don't think I will be able to handle her tears tomorrow if she cries," Hancock said finally, tilting her head up and closing her eyes. "She's finally met her father, only for him to go away." Luffy didn't answer right away. He stepped up beside her, resting his elbows on the railing, his eyes looking towards the horizon. "Gotta admit, it does feel weird having to leave you two again. You'll be okay?" Hancock looked at him and the light from the moon caught the edges of her eyes, still bright despite the tears she refused to let fall. The movement caused Luffy to look at his wife and his breath caught when he noticed the tears in her eyes. His brows drew together, confused and concerned. "Hancock?" he asked softly, his voice uncertain. She didn't answer as she looked away, trying to blink away the tears she refused to let fall. Her hands clutched the stone railing. Without another word, Luffy shifted closer. His arms slid around her waist and pulled her in gently to his side. She didn't resist and leaned into him, wrapping her arms around him. He held her tighter as he spoke. "I didn't know you were this sad. You always look so strong when I leave." She gave a small, breathless laugh, the kind that wasn't funny at all. "I have to be," she replied quietly. "Especially now for our daughter." "You don't have to hide it from me," he said quietly. Her arms tightened around him as she finally let the tears slip free. Luffy didn't say anything else as he just held her. Hancock stayed pressed against him, her fingers clutching his vest, not wanting to let go. She closed her eyes and focused on her breathing, willing herself to calm down. After a while, Luffy gently kissed her cheek and murmured, "Come on." He reached for her hand and led her inside without saying another word. Once inside, Hancock shrugged off her robe, the silk pooling like water at her feet. She didn't try to be Grace or regal. She was just Hancock, a woman who was preparing to once again say goodbye to her husband, not knowing when he'd return to her. Luffy had already climbed into bed, settling beneath the sheets. Hancock soon followed and Luffy wasted no time in wrapping his arms around her and pulling her against him. Hancock rested her head on his chest and tucked one arm over his middle. Luffy ran his hands slowly down her back, his fingers tracing paths over the silk of her nightdress. "I'll come back," he said softly, "I always do." Hancock gave a small nod, but her hold on him tightened. "I know," she replied, "but it doesn't make missing you hurt any less." Luffy's hand moved, now stroking her hair and combing through it gently with his fingers. Eventually, her breathing evened out again as she fully regained her composure. She shifted slightly, propping herself up just enough to look down at him. Her eyes searched his face as if she was memorizing it all over again. Then she leaned down and kissed him, which was returned by Luffy without hesitation. When she finally pulled away, she tucked herself back down into his chest and closed her eyes. He held her tighter and remained awake just long enough to watch her finally soupy to sleep. The morning sun was barely a sliver above the horizon. Pale orange light stretched over the docks of Amazon Lily as the Straw Hats moved with quiet efficiency, tying off crates, double-checking riggings, the usual departure routine. Up on the deck, Luffy worked with Frankie and Jinbei, hauling the last few barrels into a storage room. He moved with purpose, but his eyes kept drifting toward the dock, specifically toward the figure standing just a few steps back from the gangplank. Hancock stood with her sisters, arms loosely crossed in front of her. Her expression was unreadable, as if she was keeping a mask in place. Mari was saying something about planning their next supply trip to Blossomfall Island. Sonia asked if Hancock would like to oversee the training rotation the following week. Hancock nodded along absently, but her eyes remained fixed on the deck. Then Luffy made eye contact with her from the deck. He gave her the faintest nod as if signaling it was time for him to leave. Hancock straightened, turned slightly toward the path behind her, and spoke without looking, "Salome." The massive snake, coiled nearby, lifted her head. "Go get Lucy," Hancock said softly. "Please." Salome dipped her head once and immediately slithered off, winding her way swiftly back toward the palace. Inside the palace, Lucy was already awake. The soft rustle of sheets had given way to small thumps. Her tiny hands patted the mattress, searching for warmth for the familiar weight of her mother's arm or the comfort of her father's hand, but found nothing. She had once again managed to wiggle her way into her parents' bed during the night seeking comfort. But now, they were nowhere to be found. "Mommy," her voice cracked, barely a whisper. "Daddy?" she called again, louder this time, her voice trembling. She slid off the bed and walked out into the hallway, eyes wide. The palace felt far too big and much too quiet. She sniffled, already tearing up as her breath caught in her throat. "Mommy, Daddy." She was nearly ready to cry when a familiar figure slithered down the hall. She turned sharply just as Salome emerged into view. Lucy whimpered, reaching up with both arms. Salome lowered her body without hesitation, and Lucy climbed up, clinging to her mother's companion. Salome wasted no time. Just as Lucy was settled, she turned and slithered back toward the dock. By the time they arrived, the crew was all in place, waiting for their captain's okay to set sail. Luffy wasn't immediately in sight and Lucy's eyes searched frantically. She didn't see him and her little face crumpled. "He gone?" she asked in a breathless sob. "Daddy leave?" No, sweetheart." Hancock rushed forward, arms outstretched as Salome lowered the toddler down. Lucy tumbled into her mother's embrace with a broken cry. "I'm here. It's all right." Hancock pressed a kiss to her daughter's temple as she rocked her gently. "Want Daddy," Lucy hiccuped, her fingers gripping tight in Hancock's dress. "I know, little one," Hancock murmured, heart aching. "He's right here. He hasn't left yet." They began up the gangplank, Hancock holding Lucy close as she climbed steadily toward the Sunny's deck. The moment Luffy stepped around a corner, Lucy's head whipped up. Her sobs caught in her throat as she saw him. "Daddy," she cried, arms already reaching. Luffy was there in a second, sweeping her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. She wrapped around him like a vine, face buried in his neck, clinging with everything she had. "No leave," she whispered, pitiful and small. Luffy exhaled, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. His free arm reached out, pulling Hancock in two. She stepped into him without a word, one hand rising to cradle Lucy's back, the other resting gently on Luffy's arm. "I love you," he murmured. "Both of you." When Hancock finally pulled back, she tried to take Lucy, but the little girl wouldn't let go. "Lucy," Hancock said gently. "Sweetheart, we have to let Daddy go now." "No," Lucy sobbed, clinging harder. "No leave." Just as the moment threatened to break all over again, Robin and Nami approached quietly, something cradled between them. "We thought she might need something to hold onto," Robin said softly, holding out a small straw hat, perfectly sized for a toddler's head. "Usopp stayed up all night working on it," Nami added. "Said she should at least have something else to remember her dad besides a poster." Luffy smiled as he took it in his hands. He looked at Lucy, her tear-streaked cheeks and quivering lip, and gently kissed her forehead. "Hey, Luce," he whispered, brushing her curls back. "Look, you've got your own hat, just like me. You gotta be careful with this hat, okay? It's really special." He carefully placed the tiny hat on her head, adjusting it so it sat neatly over her messy hair. "That means you gotta be brave. You gotta protect your mom while I'm gone. Can you do that?" Lucy's eyes welled up again, but she gave the smallest nod. "Promise?" Luffy asked. She nodded once more, resting her head on his shoulder. He hugged her tightly one more time before handing her over to her mother. Hancock watched him closely, her own arms wrapped around Lucy now. Her composure held, just barely, for her daughter's sake. Luffy leaned in and kissed Hancock. General said again. "I love you more," Hancock whispered. Nami returned, clearing her throat softly. "Captain, we're ready." Luffy stepped back slowly, giving one last look first to Hancock, then to Lucy, who whimpered as her arms reached after him. He gave her a smile. "See you soon, Luce." Hancock descended the gangplank with Lucy in her arms. Salome, Mari, and Sonia were already there, waiting. The moment Hancock stepped off the last plank, Lucy broke, sobbing openly now, her small hands grasping at the air behind her as she wailed, "Daddy." Hancock held her close, kissing her head again and again, whispering words only Lucy could hear. From the deck, Luffy watched his wife and daughter walk away. His throat tightened, and he lifted a hand in a wave, eyes never leaving them. Lucy looked up, still crying, and lifted her tiny hand with effort. "Bye-bye, Daddy." Hancock's other hand lifted slowly, her fingers brushing her lips in a final kiss. The Sunny finally pulled away from the dock, and Hancock stood quietly with her daughter in her arms, watching the sea carry away the man they both love more than anything. Epilogue. The palace halls were quiet again. The sun had risen hours ago, but there wasn't much movement coming from Hancock's chambers. Lucy had finally cried herself to sleep just before sunrise, her tiny body curled tight against Hancock's chest, fingers still clutching the miniature version of her father's hat. She had been either wearing it or holding it since his ship vanished on the horizon a week ago. Now as the light from the windows made its way across the room, Hancock remained in bed, her arm holding her daughter close, her free arm draped over her eyes shielding them from the light. Even though it had only been a week since Luffy left, not a day passed when Lucy hadn't asked if today was the day he'd come back. "Soon," Hancock would whisper, "soon, little one." The months crept by with a quiet ache, but Hancock never let them pass in silence. She filled the spaces between with stories of Luffy's strength, his laughter, the way he once took down a celestial dragon to protect a friend. Each night, by lamplight, Lucy would curl beside her, eyes wide, clutching her little straw hat as she listened. Each time the transponder snail rang, it was as if the air itself shifted when they heard Luffy's voice. Hancock would bring it close, and Lucy's face would light up, her tiny fingers brushing the shell like she could feel him through it. For both mother and daughter, those calls became the brightest parts of their days. Just over a year had passed since Luffy's departure, and though time had not dulled the ache, it had shaped the way Hancock carried it. She had settled into the rhythm of absence, of transponder snail calls and softly spoken stories. Then, one afternoon, her sisters had reminded her of a simple supply run to Blossomfall Island that was scheduled. It was quiet, scenic, far removed from the responsibilities of Amazon Lily. They knew it would be good for her. They saw how this last year has been harder for her than previous times. She had agreed to bring Lucy with her, who was now 3 years old, bright-eyed and ever curious. It wasn't supposed to be anything but a routine trip, until the transponder snail rang. Luffy's voice had cracked with urgency and excitement, asking for her location. When she told him where they were, his reply had been instant. "Awesome, don't leave that island, okay." What followed had been nothing short of dreamlike. He arrived just in time for Valentine's Day, and he had thrown himself into planning it with all the chaotic affection only Luffy could manage. To end the day, there was a dinner beneath lights set up by his crewmate, Frankie. Luffy had also given her a beautiful pendant. It had been perfect. But now, the day of Luffy's departure, once again, arrived. Inside the quiet room on the perfume Yuta, everything was still. Luffy lay wide awake. His hand gently stroked through Hancock's hair while the other rested against Lucy's small back. He held both of them like they were something sacred, because to him, they were. Lucy's tiny hand was clutching his arm, even in sleep, like if she let go he might vanish. And Hancock, her body curved against his like it had always belonged there. Her legs tangled with his beneath the sheets, her cheek resting just over his heart. Luffy closed his eyes and inhaled slowly, breathing them in. He didn't dare move, not wanting to wake them and disturb this rare moment where they were all together. He hadn't had enough time with them during this visit. They'd laughed and eaten, then he got to play some with Lucy. Hancock kissed him until they both felt weak from lack of oxygen and whispered soft things against his skin when no one else was listening. And still, it didn't feel like it had been long enough. Luffy sighed and looked up toward the ceiling, his thumb now tracing slow circles against Hancock's shoulder. The world was always calling. Most of his and Hancock's crew were probably already up and soon someone would knock on Hancock's door. Sanji would probably have breakfast ready. Frankie would start prepping the Sunny for departure, and he'd have to say goodbye, again. He leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to Hancock's head, letting his lips linger for just a moment. Then he shifted slightly, holding both her and Lucy closer against him. With a quiet breath, he let his body relax fully, eyelids growing heavy once again even with the early morning light spilling across the bed. He didn't know how much time they had left before someone came looking for either of them, but in this moment, holding the two people he loved most, he was happy to just be present.